Hello, everybody. Grant Hunter here with another product growth leader conversation. Steve, as we talk about product management, we talk as a strategic role, right? The strategic and business role of product management. One of the key factors, some people use the word glue. I hate the word glue, right? But one of the key
Mm,
factors is that product management is the only function, maybe outside of HR, that
mhm.
touches the entire organization from strategy all the way down to execution. And in that role, I've been using the word empower lately,
Mhm.
and it I maybe it's something that's a word that people didn't like, but isn't product management an empowerment role? I mean, we're trying to help everybody else do their jobs better.
I've always thought so. I mean, it's like, even empowering the executives. It's like, okay, so you had this idea because you read a magazine and they had something cool in there about Chat GPT or iCloud or blockchain, and you have this idea. Well, okay, great. Let me take the idea and flesh it out and make sure there's, market validation for it and there's a business rationale to pursue it. And in effect, I'm empowering the executive team to make a good decision. Likewise, I understand personas and problems, and I sit down with my developers and I say, here's the problem we're trying to solve. Let me empower you with that context so that you can solve problems well. Likewise with marketing, sales is having this difficulty. How can we better support the sales team? And it's not supporting them one at a time. It's empowering marketing to build things that move all salespeople forward. So I've always thought of product management as very much an empowering role.
And so this week, we decided to talk about empowering the organization. And our first question, our question on Monday was, how can product management best succeed at empowering the organization? And holiday week in the United States. It was one of our lower turnout weeks in the community, or the topic just was not something I wanted to do. Eva Beasley came in pretty quickly, and she better, because I had dinner with her the night before I put it out, so she owed me answering the question. Don't just go with what's popular today. Think about the future and don't focus on fads. And I think that's one of the places where product management really can come in. Is everybody's asking about, oh, what are we doing with generative AI? What can we do with this type of stuff? Product management's job is to empower people with that, as you said, context around the problem and the persona and the market segment, not on the technology of where we can do it. So she also said, allow everyone to have a voice, be vulnerable, which I love, and be kind. And so great way for us, on those soft skills for how we can help empower people the right way. May, you started with, how do we want to work together? And I think that's a critical way to look at it, because every every organization is different. Every person in your organization is different, and different functions are going to want to be empowered differently. So instead of us pushing what we think people want on them, we should be asking them how we want to work together.
So it's not even just that, right? Like we feel like so in our roles of product as product managers, we have to talk to everyone, we have to work with everyone, and in essence, the services that we provide as product managers to our internal teams is a product in and of itself, right? And if we consider our internal stakeholders as somewhat like a customer in this specific, very specific context, um, we also need to think about what do our customers need from us, right? So in conversations with people, we generally tend to have an idea of what would work well. But really, if you're working in a small enough team, and this team is going to continue working together for a little while, a very healthy conversation to have is, how do we want to work together, right? What do you actually do? What are you actually good at?
Mhm.
What do you need
Mhm.
from me? And what do I need from you? And having that conversation like gets rid of a lot of conflicts, because like we all make assumptions that are like, okay, well, development needs these PRDs and therefore we're going to write these requirements, and then they pick it up and they build the thing and I don't like it, and like design is nowhere in this picture. But what if we just sit down and like, let's have a conversation about how we want to work together? And that
Mm.
actually, in my opinion, is how we best empower both ourselves, because we tell people what we need as opposed to like having others assume what we need, and we don't assume what other people need, right? So I think it's really important to have these conversations, because it's where teams start. It's where teams start feeling like they have the power to say something, to give input, to give feedback. And like, if you don't start with how do we want to work together, your retros probably aren't going to do anything. Your retros are going to be more people complaining. Whereas if you start with how do we want to work together, your retros are, oh hey, here's what we learned. Let's adapt to our new learnings. Let's like try something new, right? Because you've built it together.
No, completely. Gosh, about 10 years ago, I was working with a client, and they were having product management was just a nascent organization and growing up, and they were having a lot of friction with development. And I was brought in, and I'm like, hey, let's sit down and talk about this. And I love the, you had in quotes, how do we want to work together? That's basically what we did. And I said, okay, here is a persona, right, that we want to use for you guys. What's good, what's bad, what do you like, right? And let's together build a persona that you find valuable, so we can say, here's what good looks like, right? Or a problem story, right? And then we said, okay, if we now know what good looks like and have some examples of what good looks like, talk to me. If a sprint starts on day 0, how many days in advance do you want to see this and review this so you can ask questions, right? How do we set all those expectations? In May, again, I love the how do we want to work together, because that's really what it is, and that's what collaboration's about, isn't it?
Sometimes the PMs will come to me and say, I'm having this problem. And I said, have you thought about like sitting down in a one-on-one with that person and asking them, how do you want to work together? And every time they do that, somehow their problems eventually vanish, like, or they get better over time, right? There are going to be cases where this is not the right path, because like either there's a power imbalance or there's a misalignment in expectations or whatever. But like most of the time, this is this will work, especially if you're talking to someone who's open to having that dialogue.
And this is me maybe putting some of my own bias in. I think definitely with sort of our peer functions and even downstream functions, design, development, marketing, even sales, right? Some of my biggest battles with sales were like, what do you want and need? How do we make it better for you? Right. The place where I struggle with this is sometimes senior leadership, because they struggle with this concept of collaboration, maybe, right? They don't want to work on, how often have I seen people say, okay, you need to get agreement on strategy, what the strategy is, so it can guide us. And you try to talk with them about it, and they're like, oh, that's not, no, we don't want to, so yes, yes, and yes. Awesome, May. Thank you so much. Marco, I'd love to get your take on this. I mean,
Yeah, I would say there's a very fine line between micromanagement and hands-off management. And I've been on the receiving end of both spectrums, I would say. Organizations where, and I'm going to satisfy some stereotypes here, so please forgive me, where the upper management was comprised of people coming from engineering. There were engineering leads before, and they were very much used to setting very, very clear wouldn't even say guidelines, instructions of what they want on the strategic side. And they kind of brought that with them as they moved up the leadership ladder. And they applied that, and also this in some cases micromanagement, to the rest of the organization. So they didn't really look at the strategic side nearly as much, let alone the business side, and wanted to get the products out the door. So there was a very different focus. The other side, of course, was leaders coming more from the business and sales side and caring more about the bottom line and not really caring how you get there. And it ended up being this juxtaposition between, on the one hand, just make it so, hand waving kind of management, and then the, no, you work on this project or this product right now until this time, and I want it done at this time, kind of like the Pandora example, right? Where it's all about features. It's a feature-driven organization. At the end of the day, there's no real product. There's no strategy, no mission, no vision. And finding that happy medium is tough, because I haven't seen, at least not in my personal experience, that were led by product managers. People who kind of have to be the spider in the middle of the net and connect to everything, and have to kind of connect these dots and understand how things actually relate to each other. And why are we building it? You know, for who are we building it? What is it? You know, how does it align with our goals? I mean, that by itself, that alignment to goals is so difficult. I know it's the stuff that everybody hates doing because it's complex, it's risky, it's something that is in some cases abstract. So trying to set those kind of higher goals, and please take this, break it down to your level, break it down to your departments, and let's constantly just reiterate, not so much on what have you done today or have you done project X by tomorrow, rather than are we still aligned? Are we going in the same direction? Are we doing the right thing? Are we getting closer to reaching that goal? So to some degree, it's the same discussion that we've also been having about roadmaps versus release plans. You know, are you just building, feeding the beast and creating output, or do you have something that you can, like a roadmap, a goal, an outcome that you're trying to achieve further down the line? And in order to get that, you need to break down these milestones. You need to see whether you're still on the right track. So it's more I would say the alignment on direction that is more important than the alignment on the current status of, have you just finished your assignment, so to speak. And I think leaders could learn a lot more about reducing ambiguity, making the rest of the team understand where we're going, why we're going there, why does it make sense, and what everybody can contribute to it, and then let them figure out, based on their skill sets and their responsibilities, what can they actually do to move the needle closer towards that direction.
In that last sentence of yours, or phrase, paragraph, that is exactly where my head was when I used the word empowerment, right? Our job is to push decisions, to push everything down to as far out as possible, right? To the people who are closest to the customer and user, and let them do that, empower them to do that. So, oh my God, Marco, so many things in my head. But first, I was having a conversation with a CPO this morning who's in the product council we facilitate for Outsell, leading research and analyst firm in the publishing information content and data world. And he said the exact same thing. Part of the problem is most company leaders are coming from sales or engineering or finance. There's not a ton who come from product. And maybe his aspiration was, in a world where product is better understood, eventually more product management people will move into that position and enable the organization better to empower. So resonated there, but also John Cutler had a tweet earlier about measuring productivity. And, you know, a couple of people who I really like had put some comments on it. And I'm like, I responded to it and I said, gosh, my view, my experience is the biggest productivity. Somebody had talked about, you just have to hire good talent. I'm like, no, I've seen great talent be wasted by a lack of strategy and lack of alignment. Right. And so many things in my head, Mark, of wow, but it all comes down to that strategic alignment, right? You have to have a strategy and you have to be aligned.
Exactly. And people need to understand strategy. That's the most important thing. Because I've seen it also that leaders set a strategy, a vision, and very often it's not really understood. People don't really know why are we going down that direction, right? I mean, sometimes it feels like it's a blind leading the blind, or it's the lemmings. You just keep going, right? And you don't know why. Does it make sense? I don't know. I'm just doing my job, right?
No, I get it. And May just put in the chat, grant and strategy checking off the box for PGL Friday bingo. But Steve, you're the one who said a few months ago, you get it now. It all comes back to strategy. It's not just me.
I don't know that I said that. I think one time I said, this is the one time I agree with Grant on strategy. I think is what I said. But
I'll go back and look at the tapes. I'll go look at the tapes. But
all right, go back and watch the film. Sure. I'm remembering the first product management role I had come in through sales, and I was pretty intimidated by sitting down with engineers and having technical speak. They were going to say, do we want to implement this as single tenant or multi-tenant? And I have no idea what they're talking about. And I said, I'd like to do well here. How can I be a helpful, participant in this process? And I was so delighted that they said, tell us about the market. And I'm like, oh, I know about that, right? I mean, tell us about personas and problems and market, and what are your goals for the product? What is your strategy for the product? A lot of the things that we've talked about here today. And I mean this in a loving, giving, embracing way. I've never had that kind of a conversation with salespeople. I think it seems to me that many salespeople see themselves as the only salesperson. And they have a really hard time seeing that we're looking at the needs of 1,000 salespeople and 100,000 customers, and one deal is not a strategy, right? And yet, in my work with sales, I have certainly found there are lots of ways that we can empower them in an N equals many sort of way, instead of calling their customer for them or reading something to them aloud from Salesforce because they can't figure out how to find it. Actually creating materials that are helpful. I mean, that's how I got into product management in the first place. I mean, I was empowering the sales team with better sales tools than they were getting from marketing. And the VP of marketing called and said, hey, quit doing all that marketing, or come over here and join marketing, which is what I ultimately did.
And it's interesting, as we think about it, and I agree that I've had more of those good collaborations with engineering or development than I have with sales. I've had some good ones with marketing. As I said earlier, I've struggled at times with leadership. It's not as much of a two-way street there. Sometimes it's more of a one-way street,
right?
Even when it needs to be a two-way street. I have been in places with sales where sales has been thrashing in the market because there's been no clear strategy and no clear understanding. They're trying to sell ice to Eskimos, trying to sell, everything, right? It's the whole ocean, boil the
Pretty
ocean.
sure we can't say that one anymore.
Okay.
Selling ketchup to people wearing white clothing.
Yeah, so we'll go with that one. But, the concept I had was they hadn't been getting any help or support because there was a lack of strategy. So when I came in, I actually spent 6 months focusing on helping them, right? Giving them qualification questions, better targeting information, because that was a quick win for me. That was a quick win for them, and built some.
Yeah, a lot of sales enablement type stuff is a very quick win for a new product manager.
Yeah.
It instantly reduces a lot of the friction and a lot of the one-off requests that we get from salespeople by saying, hey, have a playbook, right? And I remember my daughter took a job in sales, and she came home the first day and I said, how did it go? And she's like, you wouldn't believe it. They handed me the yellow pages and said, here's your CRM. Here are your leads.
Yeah.
Right. And then she said, well, what products do we sell? And they said, well, there's a lot of interesting stuff on the shared drive. And so she and I spent the weekend putting together a sales enablement toolkit. It's like, here are your products. here's the compelling reason to buy, here's the kind of people we're shopping with, who are shopping with us and so forth. We built this whole book out. She came in on Monday and was just using it, and somebody came over and said, hey, what is that and where did you get it? And she's like, oh, my dad and I put this together this weekend. And they said, can I have a copy? And she foolishly said yes. She should have said for $5,000 or 10% of your revenue or something else, but she's kind. And so before you know it, sales skyrocketed in this organization because there was some, if you will, strategy to what is it, who is it for, why would they want it?
It's simple, right? Those couple questions. And I was thinking about this when Marco was talking, Steve. We talk about 3 key things that have to happen to get product success on purpose. Clarity of roles. Well, that's one way to empower the organization. Let's get some clarity of role. Make sure people know who product management is and what we do and the value we can create, but also how do we do handoffs? Where are the clarity and roles there? Consistent playbook, right? Let's collaborate them, like May said, on how do we work together? What do you want? What's good look like? In strategic alignment, right? I think those 3 things help us get product success and purpose because it helps us empower the organization. May, you got a quizzical look on your face.
I don't know if I agree with that statement. So here's the thing about the word handoff, right? It is very much, I have performed this task and now it's your turn to perform that task. And there is no structure. There's a lot of structure actually. It's literally a process, right? But there is no discussion of like, what does this actually mean? And usually if there is a handoff, it is expected that this is the way it's gonna go forever. Like, sure, you might have a retro, but like there is still very much that distinct definition around this is what's expected, and that's really hard to change. So I think that anytime you start thinking about something, anything, literally anything, as a handoff, you're like, do we need to talk about this? Because it's dangerous. Like, it's really, really dangerous to have a handoff unless if it's literally an assembly line, right? An assembly line, it makes sense because like it's very complex and it's like I do this and then the exact specs of the thing I output needs to be perfect and you need that to spec when you pick it up. But we're not talking about that
there's
here,
a difference between a handoff and throwing it over the wall and running away laughing gleefully, right? I ran track in school, but I ran long distance. But I had friends who ran relay, and what they practiced was handoffs.
Running together for 10 meters. And May and Marco, I want to say, is there a better word, right? Because it's really a collaboration zone, right? Where we bring them upstream. And if I'm thinking of development, right, we bring them upstream into the tail end of our discovery, so they're getting the context, but we stick around to help them even once the quote unquote control has.
But it's not like I'm just going to fill out a JIRA ticket and walk away laughing, right?
But
You need a conversation.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about development though.
Okay, with
like
anybody.
Every single time we talk about like empowering the organization, it's almost always limiting to design and engineering.
Good point.
Right?
Yeah, you're right.
Whenever we think about the word handoff, it's rarely about design and engineering anymore, especially if you're doing things a little better. It's almost always about sales. It's almost always about marketing, and even more so, success and support.
Yeah.
Right? And what about the rest of the organization that nobody ever thinks about? So, like, I think that's where we really need to start considering. It's like we're doing all of this around empowerment with development and design, but that's not the whole product.
No.
Right.
So,
right.
I completely agree. And then we talked about the organization. That's what we mean. But to your point, in our conversations here and elsewhere, we often are very centric on the development design handoff, maybe marketing and sales a little, but more marketing than sales perhaps. but there is the entire organization we need to do this with, and we struggle with it. Is there a better word than handoff? I'm open to new lexicon.
Yeah, I think so. So, I mean, as a non-native English speaker, I do get hung up on the semantics. And handoff is something that sounds very terminal to me, right? It sounds like, okay, I'm done, you're next, fire and forget. And what I prefer is something that initiates something, right? And that would be more like a kickoff. And the kickoff would be for a project where everybody gets together, or you can do it in multiple meetings where everybody kind of gets sworn in on what are we trying to achieve? What is the strategy? What's the goal? How do we get there? Who's even the RASI? I mean, who's going to be involved? Who's responsible? What are the action items and so forth? And beyond that, I mean, same thing there. The kickoff is also not something you just do once in the beginning and then it's go off, you're empowered, have fun. There needs to be check-ins as well. And check-ins is not something where there's somebody with drums in the back and gives the tact and then checks in as if everybody performs correctly. It's rather than a not a status report. It's literally like a check-in. It's like, hey, how's everybody doing? Is everything okay? Do you have questions? Could we clarify something? These things are ongoing, and specifically, they need to be cross-departmental. And they need to give everybody a voice. I mean, I do the same thing, even in my case, where at this point in my check-ins for a specific enabling technology, I pull in product marketing, I pull in developer relations, I pull in development, I pull in sales, so the sales force, so everybody's represented. And then we talk, in this case, if it's not a specific project that got kicked off, we talk about current, let's call it happenings. Where are we right now? Did you see any issue? Should we talk about this? Maybe somebody who's not from that particular department can think outside the box a little bit, bring a different perspective into the conversation. So again, I would say kickoff is the better term because it starts something, and then check-ins are the things that follow until you, and I haven't found an appropriate word for that yet, something that is like close to release, where you just go in and say, okay, are we good? Should we proceed?
And I'm thinking even post-release, we need to have those meetings too, because now we're getting then the feedback from the market in the terms of leads and sales and bugs or whatever it may be. And we should be keeping those cadence. And I've heard some people call them cadence calls, right? It's like we're taking a cadence, and maybe, I was working with one client on launch plans. I'm like, the cadence meetings probably are, the further away from launch they are, they're not as frequent, and the closer you get to launch, the more frequent they get. But the sort of brutalness of a handoff being terminal, I'm going to do my best to wipe that word from my vocabulary when we're talking this stuff, because I completely and totally agree.
And when Marco was saying that, I had a recollection. I've lately been talking about product manager as similar to an orchestra director or a conductor. And the insight that I just had based on what Marco was saying was, you know what? Orchestras practice. No audience, right? They get together and they have check-ins, or they have kickoffs, or they have some sort of, well, let's stick with check-in. I don't have the sheet music for this part. Oh, really? Well, how did that happen? Let's get you some sheet music, right? The orchestra director doesn't try to teach everyone how to play their instrument. They already know how to play their instrument, or they should, right? And I'm reflecting on, with the exception of development, I have never practiced working with people. I've always been thrown into actually working with them, but I have had, as you have, story writing workshops. Let's write stories together until we can ensure that communication has taken place. as opposed to, as May pointed out, with sales, I typically come in and say, okay, here's the answer, shut your yap. I mean, here's the roadmap. I don't want to hear what you want on the roadmap because this is it. I mean, I don't even know how you would practice working better relationships with sales or marketing or finance or support. May, do you want to weigh in on that?
It's not a matter of practicing. I think half the time, okay, so I have met PMs who didn't know what success did.
That didn't
I have
what?
met PMs
Know what
who,
customer success did.
yep.
Ah, okay.
I have met PMs who've never talked to a marketer. I have
Wow.
met PMs who have done a lot of things that are scary. And it's about, I think, the most important thing that a PM needs to do is understand the organization in which you exist. It's not necessarily the whole company because at a certain size, it just doesn't make sense.
Mhm.
But like, who are the people who has an impact on the performance of your product, right? Because you need to
Mhm.
understand the whole product. So who are these people? And then go talk to them. Like,
Yeah.
maybe
Mhm.
even like ask them, how do we want to work together? But like
Mhm.
it's scary when you find out people don't know who someone else is, and it's like,
And what
this
value they
person,
bring.
yeah. It's like, what do you mean you've never talked to like the head of operations for your specific segment? And they're like,
Mhm.
I didn't know this person existed. I'm like,
So
well,
to,
you're booking a meeting with them this week.
Yeah, one more delightful failure of onboarding, don't you think?
Yeah.
yeah. I, I mean, I marketing, sales, do a positioning exercise with them, right? We've done that with some of our clients where we did a case study positioning exercise, or we did the real thing for a product release, and it gets the muscles moving. But I think, maybe to May's point, maybe I was assuming this and it wasn't her point. We can do this ongoing, right? And we can get better and learn and, do it, what worked well, do our retrospective, what worked well, what didn't, how are we going to change it? And each time we do it, we learn and we
Mhm.
practice. And so, that's a place where we can get to it.
And let me remind you of one of my favorite quotes that is kind of atypical for me because it's not cynical. Um, Friends build products, enemies build documents.
Yeah. And the better we understand how we want to work together, the more that's a friendship than it is a
Right.
whatever. Our poll this week, we asked, what function does product management traditionally do the worst job in empowering and enabling? And John Krog came out right away and said marketing. And from his experience in enterprise sales, he's like, there's so much stuff we put into a release that may be technical debt, maybe a customer problem, allows the technology or delivery team to do something cool. And often we just hand these off, in the what we were talking in the bad way, hand off, just dump it on somebody in marketing's plate to let them go do with it. So I can see, from what we've been talking about, I can see that. May actually, for the first time ever, got me to vote for other. It depends. And May said she had to sleep on it, and you said product management, and it blew my mind. Talk to me about what you thought about and got to that.
I feel like I was cheating a little bit. But generally speaking, the role of product ops exists because product managers are bad at empowering product managers. Like, everything that you talk about. So I run a product event, and every time someone books a session, they're like, we should have one that talks about how we deal with stakeholders. Or, you book a session on product road mapping. They're like, well, how do we sell the roadmap to our stakeholders? And it's always about what can we do for other people, but it's never what can we do for ourselves, right? And if we're not looking inwards, how do we get better as product managers? Especially within the context of your company. Because a lot of people, show up to these events to learn to do their job better, but it's almost always to learn to do their job better for the purpose of everyone else in their organization. And so I think we do spend a lot of time thinking about sales. We do spend a lot of time thinking about marketing. Maybe we don't do a good job at it. Maybe we don't do a good job at empowering our developers, but like we talk about it. There's a lot of resources within the context of an organization spent on doing that. But like nobody ever talks about how do we do product management better. It is the role of a product leader to do that. But, given the four jobs of a product leader, at least in my opinion, so the four jobs of a product leader is people management, leadership management,
Mhm.
strategy in general, and how do we do product management? And that last one always falls by the wayside. You never have enough time for it. You never have enough time to dedicate to it, to do that change management. And this is why I believe product ops exists.
I
Um,
agree.
so all of that put together means that we never have time to think about how do we do things better.
And that's one of the main insights I get every time we do one of our classes is someone will say, this is the first time we have ever gotten together to talk about how we work. And the reality is product managers don't typically work with other product managers. They work with sales, they work with marketing, they work with development, they work with support, they work with services, they work with success. But it's fascinating when we get on these calls and talk about, okay, let's talk about how we do our work better. And they're like, this is amazing. I've never had this conversation before. Another failure of onboarding.
And I think a failure of product leadership, and we'll get to that in another week. But it blew me away because you were dead on, May. We spend all this time serving other people, but not serving yourself. And those self-help books tell you that until you love yourself, you can't love anybody else, right? Yes, and yes. I voted other. It depends, and I'm 100% on board with you on this.
But don't get me wrong on that though. Like it's so important that we continue to focus our role in serving all the other teams because that's what a product manager is.
But this is, where do we do the worst job? And you are, I believe, I voted other. It depends, which I never do. Marco, how would you vote, or have you voted since we started?
No, I didn't vote. I mean, from the get-go, just off the bat, I would have said go to market. That's the thing.
Marketing or sales?
Well, I mean, yeah, it's sort of, but it's a little bit more than that. I mean, go to market also takes the strategy into account, right? I mean,
Yeah.
what's the value? Why do we even do this? And how do we present this value to the market? How do we make people buy the stuff? And you have to have this information from the get-go. It's not an afterthought.
Yeah.
But very often it's treated like this. Hey, we've built this cool thing. Now, who do we sell it to? And that's something that a lot of product managers just don't do. But now that I've heard what May has to say, I do have to agree. And I think part of that has to do with the fact that we assume that somebody who has the product management title is a product manager. And very often that's not the case. And I see this over and over and over again. Somebody has this title, and when you talk to them about some very basic concepts of product management, they've never heard of it. They don't know how to deal with certain things. They still get hung up on one of these disciplines, either the marketing side or the development side or something else. And I think part of that also has to do with this versatility of this role, the fact that you kind of have to understand all these different areas and you have to bring them together and make sense of it and explain it to people in layman's terms. And unless you're able to do that, and you're only able to do that if you upskill on a constant basis, and even things like conversations like these, this is part of the learning function that a product manager just absolutely has to do. Keep reading up on things, keep talking to people, keep learning new things and practice them. And most product managers just don't. They may have, if they're lucky, have gone through a course, read a book, and then they think, okay, great, now I can apply this to everything. And it's not the case. Very often, I mean, organizations are so vastly different. Every single organization I've been in has seen product management and the role in almost completely contrasting ways. And I
Yeah.
could not take what I've learned in one organization and just flat out apply it to the next. I had to adapt and first of all learn where's the gap, what's actually needed here, right? And that is what defined product management for me.
Yes, completely and totally. I actually was writing some stuff down that we were saying, because the concept of so many people who with a title product manager not doing product management. And again, I think it gets back to a lack of clear definition of what product management is. Steve and I talked about it earlier this week. You ask a leadership team or anybody at a consumer goods company or pharmaceutical company what a brand manager does. Everybody knows what a brand manager does, right? It's very clear, but they're not sure otherwise. Steve, development had 40% of the vote, along with other, it depends, marketing at 20%. Are you going to go with leadership, development, marketing, sales? Or are you going to sort of triple down on May's product?
Well, no, I want to come at it in a different direction. I think the thing we just said about product managers focusing most of their energies on development is evidenced by that poll.
Yep.
Right. The biggest area of difficulty is working with development. And we have seen a number of articles and thought leaders saying that product ops is really strategic product manager. And as you just said a moment ago, we've worked with companies where the product leader will say to us, half the people here with product management titles are not doing product management. And half of the people who are doing product management don't have the title product management.
Yeah.
And in doing, roles and responsibilities, we often see that we've got UX doing product management. We've got product management doing UX. We've got product management doing sales engineering, and sales engineering or sales is trying to do road mapping. It's like it's so weird because I think we four have a very clear understanding of the scope of product management. And yet everyone else seems to be defining product management through their own lens.
Yeah.
If I go to a sales guy and say, what does product management do? They'll say they help me close deals. Or they give me sales enablement tools that are worthless. We go to development and they say they read aloud to me from Jira. We go to marketing and they say, you bring me words. Everybody's got their own perspective. And I think product management has done a very poor job of communicating its importance and its scope above and below us in the organization.
Completely.
And I think your poll indicates that too many product managers think of themselves as adjunct to development as opposed to at the hub of executive sales, marketing, support, services, and so forth.
I agree completely. Wow, this conversation.
So all of the above.
Yeah, just through the poll, this has been a long conversation. I do want to ask one of the Friday questions. What are the biggest, and I think we've been talking about this throughout, I think Steve, you just did a whole answer on this. I should have probably pulled it up before that, but what are the biggest barriers to product management empowering the organization? And what you just said is that there's not a clear understanding of either we fail as product management, product leaders to define what product management is, the value, and get the organization aligned around that, or senior leadership doesn't back that up and support it.
And or senior leadership doesn't know it either.
Yeah.
To kind of preview what we might talk about next week, many product leaders don't have many heads of product management don't have product management experience. I can't fathom a sales organization that would have a VP that had never sold before.
Yeah. Yeah. I did see one big company where the head of HR was a salesperson. But at least if you're have grown up the ladder as a leader, you're working with HR and you're doing HR things and you understand the importance of it. But you're right. And I think that,
or is that a sales guy can do anything?
or it could be that too. The barriers are also, to your point, we focus maybe too much on development, right? Which goes into this thought that we are this servant to versus a partner of the whole entire organization.
Right. Right.
May.
I think the biggest barrier is what Marco said. It is the strategic alignment piece, because we can do all we want, but if your strategic direction keeps changing, there is there is nothing you can do to keep it stable. Like, empowerment requires a lot of circumstances underneath it, and most of which is stability and also understanding where you're going, right? Because, like, you can empower people, but then they leave and you got to rebuild that culture. You got to rebuild that like understanding, this is what we can do here. And you can't do that without that very important strategic alignment.
Yeah, completely and totally. And, I guess saying strategic alignment assumes that you have a strategy, which I think is one of the biggest problems out there. Marco May just stole your answer or repurposed your answer from the poll for the answer for this question. Any other thoughts on the biggest barriers to empowering the organization?
I mean, first of all, to add to what May said, I mean, part of it, I always, I've got this metaphor of the fish, right? They always say a fish rots from the head. I mean, so it's always like leadership where some of the problems start. But when it comes to the strategy, it's the same thing. If you look at a fish, every time it sees a shiny object and changes direction, the head is doing far less movement than the tail. And the tail is where the rest of the organization is. So every time there's a slight movement of the fish going in a different direction, the rest of the body has to do
all the other work.
Much work, exactly, and catch up to that. And of course, it's always going to be a lag. So by the time that they've caught up to that, already the fish has changed directions again. So that is one thing. And the other one, of course, is not just having leadership that has a clearly defined strategy and understands that it takes the organization some time to move to that strategy in line with it, but it's also product management having leadership having product management's back.
Yep.
Because I've seen it very often too, and again, I've been on the receiving end of that too, where I did do a kickoff and I aligned everybody on the strategy and where we're going, but leadership then ultimately didn't take to that. They changed direction again, and they didn't have my back when it comes to explaining to the rest of the organization, why did we change direction again? So it came down to me to go back to everybody and say, well, what I told you yesterday is completely moot. We have to do it over again, right? And it's not leadership then explaining it to people. It's the product managers explaining that to the rest of the organization. So again, having leadership have our back, I think that's a huge barrier.
Well, first of all, your fish analogy, oh my God, I never thought of it that way, but it is so real, right? It's easy for leadership to make a change, a pivot, without thinking about the impact on the whole organization. And I completely agree. There's a fish called a muskellunge, a muskie that is spineless, and maybe that's the problem. Is most leadership are muskellunges. They're muskies. They're spineless fish. They don't care about the rest of it. Sorry, I digress. That sounds like Steve talking about sales. Gosh, yeah. Steve, any last thoughts on the empowering barriers? I mean, you started. I want to give you a chance before we move on to our wrap up.
No, I guess I have one more extension of the Marco story, in that one sentence from an executive is months of work for everyone else.
Yeah.
And that's why they should not be allowed to read airline magazines.
Or golf with their buddies.
Fair enough.
All right. Time for our takeaways. What's your biggest learning or takeaway from this conversation? Marco, I'm going to start with you.
Why did I get into product management? No, just joking. I mean, I would say it's definitely it's communication. Communication is absolutely key, and having these conversations with all the different departments, making sure that people are aligned. Now, don't just assume that people understand the strategy. Ensure they understand the strategy.
I like that. That's great. It's on us to make sure of this. May.
I think we need to talk to everyone else a lot more. I mean, like it might be. I think there's like a cultural issue within the product management domain, which is we work with developers, we work with designers, and it's like, no, you work with the whole org. Like,
Mhm.
how do we shift this mindset a little bit more? Because oftentimes working with the whole org is like a product leadership problem, but it's
Yeah,
not. It's a product management problem.
I love that. Steve.
Brilliant. Well, I'm reminded of, in one case, I did a presentation. I'm pretty sure it was to sales of product strategy, roadmap, positioning, who we are, who we aren't. And I got a call from finance. And I said, the CFO said, I heard you have this really good corporate strategy presentation. And I'm like, well, actually, it's like a product strategy presentation. He's like, that'll work too. Could you come speak to my people? And I'm like, why in the hell do they care? I mean, don't they just type a bunch of things on keyboards and run, I don't know, spreadsheets? And he's like, well, we work here too. And so I ended up going to finance and doing this presentation. And then I got a call from HR and they're like, well, we want that presentation too. And before I knew it, I had taken this product strategy presentation to every department in the company, and it became a quarterly thing. And I had not thought of that story until, some of the comments that May and Marco have made. It's not glue. It's empowering every organization and inspiring every organization within the company.
We're catalysts, right? We are people who can help people go faster, further, better, right? We are food. We give them food and contact. I think my biggest takeaway is that, boy, we got a lot of work to do, don't we, with product management and product leadership. There is a void right now. I think there's a gap in defining what product management is and should be and the value it creates, and helping the organization understand that. And to May's point from the poll, helping us understand that and believe in it, right? Until we understand and define ourselves to ourselves and put the effort into ourselves to empower ourselves, how can we expect to do it for the rest of the organization? And I think that's a big challenge we have ahead of us.
Yeah, if the parents can't agree on things, how are the kids going to know what's going on?
Wow. I know every week I say the same thing, but every week it's true. What a wonderful conversation. May and Marco, oh my God, you guys have my mind so energized right now. You've empowered me with some of the stuff you brought to the table today. Steve, you always empower me in my thoughts. And wow, what a great conversation. Thank you guys for an amazing thing. Sort of as tangential, Steve and I have sort of done a little prelude to this in some of the conversation. Next week's topic is product leadership in crisis. Steve sent a potential question, said, where have all the product leaders gone? And in my head, I started thinking Bonnie Tyler's, where have all the heroes gone from holding out for a hero? But there seems to be a lack of product leadership. Even product leaders themselves aren't sure what they should be and could be doing to do this. And so next week, we're going to talk about product leadership in crisis. And I think it's a perfect tangent and follow-up from the conversation we just had. So look forward to that conversation next week. God, part of me wants to lock it down just to the four of us because it was such a vital conversation this week. I really appreciate that. But we do this as part of the community. Hopefully we'll get some more voices into the conversation next week. Every week, Monday, the question goes in, Wednesday, well, actually, it didn't go on this week because of the holiday, so it went on Tuesday. But in Wednesday, the poll, and Friday, these amazing conversations. So, guys, thank you so much. I'll see everybody next week in the community. Have a great weekend, everybody.